All right, here's the diagram again of the brain. Damage up in here affects people's planning and politeness and consideration of others. Prefrontal lobes, they used to do a surgery in which they would do a section that would push the eye aside and stick a knife in and go and separate off the prefrontal lobes. It's called a prefrontal lobotomy, or just a lobotomy for short. Still legal to do it. There may still be a few people doing it, but it's fallen out of favor. Here's the central sulcus, or the sylvian fissure. That's the crease right here. And this gyrus is the precentral gyrus, the motor cortex. So stimulation here on the left side of the brain produces motor responses on the right side of the body. Stimulation here, post-central gyrus, also called the primary somatosensory cortex. Person has sensations on the right side of the body. And then if we just turn the whole thing around, you've got a motor and a sensory cortex on the right side of the brain connected to the left side of the body. So the left side of the brain connected to the right side of the body, the right side of the brain is connected to the left side of the body. So this is the parietal lobe over here, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Occipital lobe, vision, so stimulating here, the person sees things, and stimulating here, the temporal lobe, the person hears things. And here on the left side of the brain, some speech areas. There's the Broca's region and Wernicke's region, some other regions associated with speech. They tend to be, for most people, on the left side of the brain. So most normal people that haven't had a stroke or had some damage or tumor or something happen in early life, typically it's in the left hemisphere, and we'll be saying more about that today. So we're going to be talking more about hemispheric specialization. Here's again a picture of the homunculi that Enfield created. So this is cutting through the brain, but also he's folded it over, and so in some versions of the book he's folding them both over so as not to give the impression that you have a motor cortex and a sensory cortex on opposite sides of the body, opposite sides of the brain. You've got one of these on each side, motor and sensory, motor and sensory. These are the homunculi, so the region I was pointing to in the other diagram probably was the face, large region in humans devoted to the face and the hands. Monkeys also have a relatively large region devoted to the hands. Other animals like dogs, smaller region to the paws compared to humans on the brain. So these are the homunculi, or the little men, or the little person, representing where you get a response depending on where you stimulate on the brain. I mentioned the prefrontal lobotomy. The first case of prefrontal lobotomy is Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a dynamite tamper. His story illustrates the idea of accidental damage. His job was to put the dynamite in the hole and then tamp it down with a metal rod and then put the blaster in to set it off. And I guess he was standing in front of it when he was tamping it down, and it exploded. And it followed this trajectory. It didn't get stuck. It went through his head and it continued on for a couple of miles and came down quite a distance away. Knocked him down, he got back up, and he swore. And after that he swore a lot. People who get prefrontal lobotomies, they swear a lot, and they're not considerate of other people's feelings. He seemed to have trouble planning in the future, and so he exhibited all the classic syndrome of a prefrontal lobotomy. So he's the case of the first prefrontal lobotomy. But he lived and continued to exhibit himself, so he would show up kind of later in life. People would say, "You want to see a hole through somebody's head? Here, take a look." People could look through there and see this guy, or look the other direction. I'm going to talk a bit today about the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is a big body of myelinated fibers. So if you take that class we have in the upper division for psych majors, where everybody gets a sheep brain and you dissect it, You're going to see the corpus callosum. You're going to dissect that, take a look at it. That's the brain. So here's the brain, seen from the left side, cut down the midline. So right down there, you're looking from the side. Here's the corpus callosum. It's going to show up not purple like this. They've just colored it so we can point it out. But compared to the rest of the tissue, the rest of the tissue is going to be gray. Those are cell bodies. These are myelinated axons. So the corpus callosum are axons that are myelinated, wrapped in fat, and so it's going to look white. This is going to look gray, and this is going to look whiter because it's wrapped as the color of fat, wrapped in the fat cells. If you dissect from the top, so now we're looking at the brain from above, and they have dissected down through the cortex till they get, so they've cut their way down, they've dissected their way down, and now they're looking at the corpus callosum from above. There are cell bodies over here that are sending axons across this way, and there are cell bodies over here sending axons across that way, allowing the two hemispheres of the brain to communicate with each other. So you've got two hemispheres. When you talk about the Earth, it's a globe. The half of a sphere is called a hemisphere. The bottom part is also, that's the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, and the equator right there, right? So if you go down to the southern hemisphere, down to Australia or South Africa or somewhere, you can go to the northern hemisphere. Brain has two hemispheres. It's not really spherical exactly, but the right hemisphere. So here we're looking from above and the person's looking that way. This is the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And there are deep structures that connect the two, but the two hemispheres of the cerebrum are connected by this big body of fibers. It's called the corpus callosum because it's a big body. So corpus, like the corpus delicti, the corpse that you find in the morgue, that's a body. The Marine Corps, that refers to the body of people that belong to the Marines. So corpus meaning body, and callosum referring to like colossal or large. We have a big body, large body of fibers connecting the two hemispheres. It's also known as the great cerebral commisure, meaning the connection between the two cerebrums. So you may see it called that, probably in some videos you might find online. Now, to explain to you how it works, I think I'll turn the lights on, and I need to give you a couple of properties. We'll be saying more about vision later, but we're going to talk about the two eyes. So here's the two eyes. This is the right eye, so we're looking at them from above, and the left eye. This is the right visual field. This is the left visual field. And we're looking at the brain. I'm going to diagram the brain this way. The two hemispheres we're looking at from above. There are plenty of structures down below, the pons, the amygdala, the hippocampus, all the limbic system is down there. Cerebellum is going to be back here. Here's our occipital cortex in the back. So this is the right hemisphere. And this is the left hemisphere of the brain. Let me get some colored ends. Now, what's in the left visual field? We're going to represent everything that happens in the retina of the eyes by the what's known as a pinhole model of the eye. I'll say more about that later, but every ray of light that enters the eye, we're going to represent it as going through a single point. which we'll place on the front of the eye. So what's in the left visual field ends up going through this point right over here and ending up over on this side of the eye. And what's over in the left visual field is going to go through this point. Now really way up over here would be this part of the visual field, so it would project farther down here. But so what's in the left visual field ends up on the right sides of the retina. And what's in the right visual field, so I have blue representing that, is going to go through the same point and end up on the left side of the retina. And then the axons leave the eye and go to the optic nerve. And these come to the optic chiasm and cross, and they synapse here on a couple of structures, the lateral geniculate nucleus and the superior colliculus. And these fibers come here, they come to the optic chiasm, and they also come to this side. So what's in the left visual field, and then there are fibers that carry the information here to the occipital cortex, to the visual cortex of the right hemisphere. So what's in the left visual field ends up in the right hemisphere. What's in the right visual field, so these fibers come to the optic chiasm and they cross and they send their fibers up here. And these fibers come here and they stay on the same side. Now this place where they cross is called the optic chiasm because people looked at it and said, that looks like the letter chi. So it's called the chiasm. It's a place where the optic nerve comes together from the two eyes and then separates apart, forming what looks like the letter chi, so it gets called the optic chiasm here. So there's this X that you see forming with these, with the optic nerves come together and then they separate. So that's known as the optic chiasm. And notice that what's in the right visual field ends up in the left hemisphere. And what's in the left visual field ends up in the right hemisphere. Which hemisphere talks? The left hemisphere talks. Kyle, was that you?
What?
Who
No.
said, oh, you said good, that's right. The left hemisphere talks. So speech is over here in the left hemisphere for most people. So you're going to need to remember these things in order to answer these questions. How many have seen the video that was assigned? So you saw some experiments on this. And so you're going to understand how to answer those questions, basically the kinds of questions that are those maybe puzzling findings that you saw being demonstrated. So here's some people. Some people have epilepsy, and the drugs don't control epilepsy. Some famous people have had epilepsy. It's not really insanity. Julius Caesar was one, the falling down disease. He tried to keep it secret because he was afraid that if people thought he had epilepsy, they wouldn't let him be, dictator of Rome. They didn't like the idea of him being emperor of Rome anyhow. They got assassinated when they thought about making him king. At any rate, some people have epilepsy and it can't be controlled by the drugs. And a person who's epileptic may have seizures, they may fall down, they may hit their head on the ground, they may bite their tongue and bleed to death. There are some drugs that can control the seizures, but sometimes the drugs aren't effective. A person that is vulnerable to seizures shouldn't drive because they can lose control, drive off the road, kill himself, drive into oncoming traffic and kill other people. It's a dangerous condition to have. A colleague of mine who's a famous economist machina, is unable to drive, but he can attend conferences if he has at the moment a girlfriend that's willing to drive him, so he can come to the conferences. The girlfriends will say he's very strange because sometimes he'll be sitting there and then he's just not there. Talk to him, he doesn't say anything back. It's very strange. He's about to have a seizure in which he may fall over and then seize up. And in these cases that are really difficult, that can't be controlled by drugs, the theory was that there's some damage somewhere. Sometimes they'll try to do a surgery to remove the damage. But the theory is that the damage starts sending bad messages across, and then the healthy part over here receives the message and sends back an acknowledgement that it received the message, kind of like Kermit or one of these Telnet software packages, like communicating through the internet. When you send a packet of information through the internet, the computer that receives it sends back a copy so that the first computer can send a copy of the message and then compare what it gets back and say, okay, we communicated. I sent you the packet, you got it the way I sent it. And if it's wrong, it says, okay, that one was wrong, I'm going to resend that packet of information. So communications software sends information to one side and it's sent back to check that the information has been properly received. And so the theory is that damage, the information is being sent across and this side of the brain is acknowledging having received it, and so this is sending faulty information and it's being echoed back and being sent back again and echoed back. And this echoing back and forth of the faulty information is what triggers the seizure. So that's the theory. So in an attempt to alleviate it, they said, why don't we try cutting the corpus callosum? And the people that have had that surgery are called split brain people. So the brain has been split into two brains. There are two hemispheres that normally are connected by the corpus callosum. And now you have, so normally these two hemispheres would be connected by all these fibers going back and forth. The split brain, they don't cut the optic chiasm. They don't cut the deeper structures down below, the hypothalamus or anything down there. No, they wouldn't cut that. But they've cut the corpus callosum, separating the two hemispheres. So that's known as the split brain operation. Now, a split brain person, you wouldn't necessarily know anything funny about him. You saw him in the video. A person like that might be walking along with a book in their right hand, and they'd be coming by along here. And all of a sudden, the left hand might take the book, drop it in the trash, and then you'd say to the person, what you got in your right hand? They say, book. And they go, oh, where's your book? And they'd say, I don't know, but they might blush. So they have a little bit. Occasionally you can find a symptom. And you can do experiments in which the split brain people are different from a person that hasn't had the split brain operation. And so here's an example of such an experiment. This picture is from Callet. So we're going to have the person look at a computer screen. They're going to fixate on a dot on the screen. And they fixate here. It's a blank screen, and then we flash, hat, band, and then it goes away. And you say to the person, what did you see? What are they going to say? They're going to say band. Why? Because band is in the right visual field. Right visual field comes the optic chiasm. They placed it farther back in the brain. It should be farther forward, but they just wanted room for the artist to draw this in. Here's the lateral geniculate nuclei. There's also a superior colliculus in there. Band is going over here, ending up in the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere talks. So what do you see? Band. I want you to point with your right hand to the word that you saw. Right hand's connected to which hemisphere? The left. What did left hemisphere see? So they point to band. I want you to point with your left hand to what you saw. Left hand's connected to which hemisphere? Okay, point to what you saw. They point to hat. All right. So if you say to the person, Did you see the word hat? They would say no, but they might shake their head yes. Did you see the word band? They would say yes, but they might shake their head no, because the other hemisphere is shaking their head no. All right? Where half the face might make a puzzled expression. All right, everybody clear on that? So we'll do another one of these experiments. So you want to understand how to answer these questions. All the 1 million students taking Intro Psych are going to be asked these questions on their final exam, and that includes you folks. So you should expect to have questions on split brain research or split brain procedure. So again, we have the person looks at the fixation point. We flash a flower in the right visual field and a cat in the left visual field. If I ask the person, what did you see? What are they going to say?
Flower.
Because the left hemisphere speaks. And what did the left hemisphere see? Left hemisphere saw the flower because it's in the right visual field. Left visual field is cat. Left visual field ends up in the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere saw cat. Point with your left hand to what you saw. Left hand's connected to which hemisphere? Right hemisphere. So the left hand is going to point to cat. Right hand, what did you see? Point with your right hand. Now you saw in the video where the person was asked to draw what they saw, and they actually drew pictures that in this case looked reasonable, like what it was. And then when they would then ask the person, what is it you drew? And the person would say, I drew, I think the example was a saw or something like that. What did you draw? The person says, a saw. Why'd you draw that? I don't know. All right. So let's review what we need to know in order to answer these questions. So here's the principles you need to know to answer the questions about the split brain. The term split brain refers to the section of the cerebral commissure. What's a section again? That means a cutting where you don't actually remove anything. So it is not a lesion or an ablation, but a section. So they simply go in and they cut, separating the two hemispheres. The other word for the great cerebral commissure is the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum has been sectioned, or the cerebral commissure has been sectioned. Why is the surgery done? It's done in cases of uncontrolled epilepsy, where it's kind of like a last resort of what to do. So it's been done in a number of people, and you saw in the video an example of a person like that being tested. What are some principles you need to know? The left hemisphere speaks, and it does the talking. So whenever the question is, what does the person say? The left hemisphere is the one that's going to do the talking. The right hemisphere doesn't speak, but understands speech. So in the video you saw, they said, I want you to draw something with your left hand. The person understood the instruction and followed the instruction to draw. So you saw the person follow, I want you to point with your left hand to something. So the person understands speech, with the right hemisphere understands speech well enough to follow directions. But it doesn't do the talking. Maybe it's also deficient in comprehension. Maybe it isn't as good at verbal tasks. But it is able to follow the instruction. The right visual field ends up in the left hemisphere, so LH is standing for left hemisphere and not Lee Hobson. That was the previous name of my spouse here. The left visual field ends up, that's why she was making that face probably. No. The right visual field, so it ends up in the left hemisphere. The left visual field ends up in the right hemisphere. The right hand, you can sing it to the tune of them bones, them dry bones. The right hand connected to the left hemisphere, and the left hand connected to the right hemisphere. Anyhow, you can sing that to yourself if it helps you remember it. And the right leg's connected to the left hemisphere, and the left leg's connected to the right. The whole right side of the body is connected to the right? We've got the sensory, motor and sensory cortex on the left side of the brain, on the cortex out there, so the right side of the brain. And then we've got the question, well, if the left hemisphere speaks, those same regions in the right hemisphere, what do they do? And here there's a lot of pop psych nonsense. And depending on which edition of Callett you have, Callett in one edition, he has like a 2 or 3 page rant about the pop psych authors. He's cut it down in some editions because he kind of went on for a long time. This happens to be a field that's of interest to him, of Callett. And if you go on, to YouTube, you will find videos that look professional. They're professionally made. They look like documentaries talking about hemispheric specialization by people that have never read a psych book. But they have diagrams of the brain, and they have videos, and they have whole discussions and everything that's total bullshit. It's a technical word that we use to mean that it's incorrect nonsense that's simply fabricated, that's been put there for who knows. The people read each other's things and they see this stuff online and they convince each other. They read books that are for sale in the bookstores that no psych professor has ever read and corrected for them. And they didn't bother to take a course or read a book on psychology, but they created this nonsense. And the nonsense is propagated through television commercials, so it's in the media. You've seen television commercials that say, my left hemisphere wants to be rational and have a car with good mileage and a good safety record. But my right hemisphere wants me to think I have a big penis, wants me to be a sexy European, and wants to be excited and drive fast. So this car satisfies both your hemispheres. It has good mileage and a safety record, and you can drive fast and think you're sexy. So forget what you read in the pop psych stuff. So I have to tell you what they say so that you will know enough not to fall for it. There is no gender difference between the two hemispheres. Maybe a 0.1 correlation. And if there is a 0.1 correlation, the pop psych people got it backwards. So let me explain what I mean by that. The pop psych people will tell you that the left brain is male thinking and the right brain is intuitive female thinking. That's total BS. The left brain has verbal stuff in it. Females tend to do better at verbal IQ items than males with a 0.1 correlation. Is that a big correlation? 0.1? That's 1% of the variance. Would you get excited about 1% of the variance? 1% off at the mall today? No, there's a tiny little difference between the genders. Females tend to do a little better on IQ items that are verbal, that have to do with vocabulary and words. And in high school, you'll notice that the females tend to do a little better than the males in English classes up through, you know, the sophomore and junior years in high school and so on. Tend to be more females in those honors English classes. The left side of the brain has got speech in it. If speech is what we're talking about, females tend to be better. So the pop psych authors, if they say that's male thinking on the left side, they got it backwards, because if anything, you've got to say that the verbal, the females tend to have a little advantage. Now what's over on the right side based on actual research? Is it emotion? And the answer is no. But maybe spatial or something, maybe math, and maybe music are over in there. And there are some studies that go like this. So I'll give you an example of kinds of studies that, from which people have concluded that, and males tend to do a little better on the IQ items dealing with spatial. So if you show people like a shadow and say, is that a right hand or a left hand? You know, you show some pictures of the hand. Males tend to do a little better at that kind of task. They tend to do a little better at copy a figure, at recognizing, is this image like that one rotated? Again, about a 0.1 correlation. So not a big deal. But, so, if anything, males tend to do a little better, but the pop psych authors have the hemispheres backwards if they're thinking of that 0.1 correlation, which they're not. If you have you tell a person to copy a figure, I'm going to exaggerate to illustrate here. We have a split brain person now, and the split brain person is asked to copy the figure. Right hand is connected to which hemisphere? Okay. The left hemisphere. The left hand's connected to which hemisphere? But most people are right-handed, so we've got a right-handed split brain person asked to copy this figure with the left hand. I'm exaggerating. Notice that the lines aren't very good because the person is really right-handed and isn't as good at drawing nice lines. But the point I'm trying to make, so here's the diagram the person makes with the left hand. The diagram's basically right, so here's our left hand. So there's the diagram with the left hand. This is a right-handed person. Right hand's connected to which hemisphere? What does the left hemisphere do? Speech, right? Copy the figure. The person is good at drawing nice straight lines because they're right-handed. And I'm exaggerating, but this picture doesn't look right, does it? Okay? So, tasks that have to do with spatial, even though the drawing of lines, the person is right-handed, they draw better lines, the figure doesn't look right. With the left hand, the drawing isn't as good. And I've exaggerated the wiggliness here. I could have done better. But so the lines aren't as good, but the shape is right. So this suggests the right side of the brain is helping with spatial. You can also give people tasks such as, you give them a lot of blocks like this. So some of the blocks, some of them look like this, some of them they're diagonal, some of them have a color like this. Give people a lot of blocks and then you give them a pattern. I want you to reproduce it by making these blocks. Okay? And the people have to take the blocks and assemble it to make a picture. Normal person, you will use both hands. So they will take the blocks and they will assemble it and they can reproduce the picture. Split brain person, using both hands. One hand, the right hand is messing up what the left hand does. So when you talk about the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, you will see the right hand make a motion and the left hand correct it. And the right hand put it back in the wrong place. So, but if they use just the left hand, they do a better job at making the picture connected to the right side of the brain than with the right hand, which is connected to the left side of the brain. They're not able to do as well at matching a pattern. So spatial tasks seem to be controlled in the right hemisphere. Recognizing musical tones. Ever played the contest like they do it in bars sometimes where they play 3 or 4 notes and then you're asked what song is that? Right? You can present the melody into the left ear or into the right ear in a split brain person, and people are better at the music in the right hemisphere. So math, especially having to do with graphs and figures, diagrams and geometry, tends to be done better in the right hemisphere. Here's a task. Which person is happy? Come on, it can't be that bad. Left or right? And which one's unhappy? Right. Is this an emotional task or is this a spatial task? This is the study that may have set off all the nonsense. This is a spatial task. The right hemisphere does it better. But when you hear this talk about the right hemisphere is emotional, the right hemisphere is better at a task like this. But this is a spatial task. And maybe this is where the nonsense originated. Somebody misunderstood. Recognizing emotion in faces is a spatial task. You have to be able to see whether the smile goes up or down in order to tell what emotion it is. And so that may have been what led to all the nonsense. So beware the pop psych authors. You will read in Callet, depending on what edition you have. He rants about this. It'll be a 2 or 3 page rant Beware the articles. There are articles on it, there are lectures on it, there are videos about it. You will see television programs, you will see television commercials, car commercials, a constant stream of misinformation about hemispheric specialization that you should not fall for. And when you hear people talk about it, if they claim the left brain is male and logical and the right brain is female, intuitive and emotional, that's just total nonsense. It was just created out of thin air, or maybe from a misunderstanding of this one study that somehow this rumor propagated itself into the media. You can read the actual books about it and do better than that. Any questions about the hemispheric before we go on to the next topic, about hemispheric specialization?